Commander Lee Jun stood at the viewport of his ship as it broke through Navia's cloud cover. The planet below was mostly blue and green, with vast oceans and thick forests. It looked peaceful. After 15 years in space diplomacy, Lee knew that looks could be deceiving. "Commander, we will land in 5 minutes," said his pilot. Lee nodded. "Thank you, Hana." His mission was simple: make first contact with the Navians and establish diplomatic ties. Earth's interstellar coalition had found the planet 3 months ago. Early reports showed the Navians were peaceful but not very advanced in technology. They had only just begun exploring their own solar system. The ship landed smoothly in a clearing. A group of Navians waited nearby. Lee took a deep breath and straightened his uniform. First impressions mattered. The landing ramp lowered with a hiss. Lee walked down confidently. The warm air hit him first, then the smells, like pine trees and cinnamon. The Navians were taller than humans, with slender bodies. Their skin came in shades of blue, green, and purple. All had large, expressive eyes that seemed to shine with inner light. One stepped forward. Her skin was light purple with patterns that glowed softly. She wore a simple white robe with silver designs. "Commander Lee Jun of Earth," she said in perfect English. "I am Ji Hyun, your cultural guide during your stay. Welcome to Navia." Lee smiled. "Thank you for the welcome, Ji Hyun. I'm honored to be here." "You speak our language well," Lee added, surprised. "We have been studying Earth broadcasts for some time," Ji Hyun explained. "Your entertainment shows are very popular here. We've learned much about humans through them." Lee tried not to wince, thinking about what impressions Earth TV might have given. "I hope they showed our better qualities." Ji Hyun's face changed in a way Lee couldn't read. "Humans are unpredictable in your stories, but you value honor and keeping promises. This we respect." She led him toward a group of older Navians wearing more elaborate robes. "The High Council is eager to meet you." The meeting hall was large and built from a crystal-like material that caught the light. The 7 members of the High Council sat in a half-circle. Ji Hyun stood beside Lee, translating when needed, though most council members spoke some English. "We welcome Earth's representative," said the center council member, whose name was Dury. "Though we must be honest, some of us feared this meeting." "Feared?" Lee asked. Another council member named Taz spoke up. "Humans have a reputation for being aggressive when challenged. Your history has many wars." Lee nodded slowly. "We have a troubled past, yes, but we've learned from it. The Interstellar Coalition was formed to promote peace between worlds." "Pretty words," said a third council member named Kwan. "But will Earth stand with Navia when the Voraks return? Or will you disappear like the others?" Ji Hyun looked uncomfortable. "Counselor, the commander doesn't know of the Voraks yet." Lee turned to her. "Who are the Voraks?" The council exchanged looks. Finally, Dury sighed. "The Voraks are predators," he explained. "They raid worlds for resources and slaves. They attacked our outer settlements 2 years ago. We fought them off, but barely. Our technology is no match for theirs. We've sought help from other spacefaring races," Tai added. "They offered sympathy, but no real help." Lee understood now why they were cautious about Earth. "The Coalition doesn't allow member worlds to be attacked without response," he said. "If Navia joins, you would have our protection." Several council members looked hopeful, but Kwan remained doubtful. "We should continue this discussion tomorrow," Dury said. "Ji Hyun will show you to your quarters. We have arranged for you to visit one of our refugee camps in the morning. It might help you understand our situation better." The next day, Ji Hyun took Lee to a large camp near the forest edge. Hundreds of Navians lived in simple shelters. Many looked thin and tired. These people fled from the outer settlements after the Voraks attacks, Ji Hyun explained. They lost everything. Lee watched children playing a game similar to soccer. Despite their situation, they found ways to be happy. An older Navian approached them. One of his arms was missing. This is my uncle, Young, Jae-hyun said. He was a teacher before the attack. Young bowed slightly. The human diplomat. Have you come to help us or just to talk? Uncle, Jae-hyun said sharply. Commander Lee is here to build friendship between our worlds. Friendship won't stop the Voraks when they return, Young replied. Lee looked Young in the eyes. The coalition can offer real help, not just words. Many have said that, Young answered. Yet here we sit in tents, waiting for the next attack. A small child ran up to Young, grabbing his leg. The old teacher's face softened as he patted the child's head. This is Min, he said. His parents didn't escape. Lee knelt down to Min's level. The boy stared at him with curious eyes. Hello, Min, Lee said softly. Min reached out and touched Lee's hand, fascinated by his 5 fingers instead of the Navian's 4. Different, Min said. Lee smiled. Yes, but still friends. That night, Lee couldn't sleep. The faces of the refugees stayed with him. He walked to the window of his quarters and looked at the stars. A soft knock came at his door. It was Ji-hyun. I'm sorry to disturb you, she said, but I saw your light was still on. I was thinking about the camp, Lee admitted. Ji-hyun nodded. I thought you might be. Humans seem to feel things deeply. Your people have suffered, Lee said, and no one helped. The council isn't sure Earth will be different, she replied. Words are easy. Actions are harder. Lee turned to face her fully. Ji-hyun, can I ask you something personal? She nodded. Do you think we can help your people? Jae-hyun's luminescent patterns glowed a little brighter. I studied humans for years. You are stubborn, sometimes reckless, but when you give your word, you keep it. That's rare among the stars. She looked out at the night sky. I want to believe Earth is different. We are, Lee promised. If these Voraks return, they'll learn that humans stand by their friends. Jae-hyun's expression showed both hope and worry. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. The Voraks are terrible. Lee looked back at the stars. One of them might hold the Voraks' homeworld. I need to report to my superiors about this threat. The coalition should prepare. You would really help us? Ji-hyun asked, her voice small. Lee placed a hand on her shoulder. I promise, Ji-hyun. If the Voraks come back, they'll have to deal with Earth too. We protect our allies. Jae-hyun's eyes widened. You shouldn't make promises you can't keep, Commander. Humans always keep their word, Lee said with a smile. It's not just what we say, it's who we are. Jae-hyun seemed both grateful and worried about his promise. She knew how dangerous the Voraks were. But for the first time in years, she felt hope. What neither of them knew was that on the far edge of the system, a Vorak scout ship was already watching. And it wouldn't be alone for long. 3 months passed quickly. Lee Jun had settled into life on Navia. The diplomatic talks were going well. The Navians were close to joining Earth's interstellar coalition. Lee had sent regular reports back to Earth about the Voraks' threat, but his superiors seemed more interested in trade agreements than defense planning. Today, Lee and Ji-hyun were visiting a school in the main city. The Navian children were fascinated by the human visitor. They crowded around Lee, touching his hair and asking questions. Is it true humans can run for hours without stopping? Asked one small boy. Some of us can, Lee said with a smile. We evolved as endurance hunters. What's the tallest building on Earth? Asked a girl with bright blue skin. The Dubai Tower is over 1 mile high, Lee answered. The children gasped. Navian buildings rarely went above 5 stories. Ji-hyun watched from the side, her face happy. In these months, she had become more than just Lee's guide. They were friends now. She had taught him Navian customs, and he had taught her Earth card games. Lee was even learning to speak the Navian language, though he struggled with the musical tones. A teacher approached them, looking worried. She whispered something to Ji-hyun. Lee saw Ji-hyun's skin patterns dim, a sign of fear or concern. What's wrong? Lee asked when the children had moved away. The council needs us immediately, Jae-hyun said, her voice tight. They didn't say why, but it's urgent. The council chamber was in chaos when they arrived. Council members talked over each other. Screens around the room showed star maps and moving dots. What's happening? Lee asked. Dury, the head counselor, turned to Lee with a grim face. Vorok ships, a fleet of them. They entered our system 2 hours ago. Lee felt his stomach drop. How many? 15 warships, Counselor Ta said. Bigger than the raiders from before. They'll reach Navia in 6 days, added Kwon, who had always been the most doubtful of humans. Our long-range scanners just detected them. Lee stepped forward to look at the screens. The dots representing Vorok ships moved in a tight formation. This is a full invasion force, he said quietly. We cannot fight them, Dury said. Our few defense ships would be destroyed instantly. We should prepare for evacuation, suggested Ta. At least save some of our people. With what ships? Kwon asked bitterly. We have few spacecraft capable of leaving the system. Lee turned to Ji-hyun. Her skin had gone so pale it was almost white. The glowing patterns had nearly disappeared. We need to contact Earth, Lee said firmly. The coalition must send help. Back in his quarters, Lee established a secure connection to Earth Command. The face of Admiral Park appeared on the screen. Commander Lee, this is unexpected. Admiral, Navia is facing an imminent Vorok invasion. 15 warships will reach the planet in 6 days. I'm formally requesting coalition military assistance. The Admiral's face showed no surprise. We received your reports about the Voroks. Intelligence has been monitoring the situation. Then you know how serious this is, Lee pressed. Navia needs our help. Admiral Park sighed. Commander, the coalition's resources are stretched thin. The border conflict with the Meridian Alliance has escalated. All available ships are being deployed there. Lee couldn't believe what he was hearing. Sir, with respect, the Navians will be destroyed without our help. The Navians are not yet coalition members, the Admiral pointed out. And even if they were, we simply don't have ships to spare right now. The best we can offer is to fast-track evacuation for key Navian leaders and scientists. That would save a few hundred at most, Lee said, anger rising in his voice. There are millions of Navians. I'm sorry, Commander. Those are the realities we face. Continue diplomatic efforts and prepare essential personnel for possible evacuation. That's all we can do at this time. The screen went dark. Lee stared at it in disbelief. Then he slammed his fist on the console. When Lee told the council about Earth's response, the room went silent. Then Kwon laughed bitterly. Just as I predicted. Humans are no different from the others. Big promises, no action. That's not fair, Jae-hyun said. Commander Lee has been our true friend. Friend or not, his people have abandoned us, Kwon replied. Dury raised a hand for silence. What options do we have left? Surrender, Ta suggested quietly. Perhaps if we don't resist, the Voroks will be merciful. Lee shook his head. Everything I've learned about the Voroks suggests they don't understand mercy. They'll take what they want and destroy the rest. Then we die fighting or die surrendering, Kwon said. Not much of a choice. Lee straightened his back. There is another option. I still have my ship. It has advanced systems that could be adapted to help defend Navia. The council members looked at him with confusion. 1 ship against 15. Kwon scoffed. That's suicide. Not combat, Lee clarified. My ship has defense systems and communication technology that could be modified. If we combine it with Navian knowledge of this system, we might create something that could help. Hope flickered across Dury's face. What do you need from us? Engineers, technicians, and access to your communication satellites, Lee answered. And we need to start now. Later that night, Lee was in his ship's engine room, removing panels and rewiring systems. Ji-hyun watched him work. "What are you really doing?" she finally asked. Lee glanced up. "Creating a defense network. With one ship's systems." Ji-hyun shook her head. "Even humans can't perform miracles." Lee smiled slightly. "Before I became a diplomat, I was a military engineer. This ship has technology the Navians haven't seen before. We can use it." Ji-hyun stepped closer. "The coalition abandoned us. Why are you still helping?" Lee put down his tools and faced her. "The coalition made a political decision. I made a promise to you and to the refugees at that camp. I intend to keep it." "Lee," Ji-hyun said softly, using his first name for the first time. "The Voraks will kill you. They'll kill everyone who resists." "Maybe," Lee admitted, "but humans don't break their promises just because they're hard to keep." Ji-hyun's skin patterns flickered with emotion. "I've seen what the Voraks do to planets that fight back. Please, don't do this. Take your ship and go. Save yourself." Lee shook his head. "I can't do that." "I'm begging you," Ji-hyun said, her voice breaking. "Don't throw your life away for a promise no one expects you to keep." Lee placed a hand on her shoulder. "Ji-hyun, on Earth we have an old saying. Your word is your bond. If a human breaks their promise, they'd break part of themselves. I promised to help protect Navia if the Voraks returned. I won't break that promise." Tears formed in Ji-hyun's large eyes. "You're being foolish." "Maybe," Lee smiled. "But that's another thing about humans. Sometimes our foolishness leads to our greatest achievements." He turned back to his work, connecting wires and reprogramming systems. Ji-hyun stood watching him, torn between admiration and despair. Outside in space, the Voraks fleet continued its steady approach to Navia. 5 days remained until they arrived. 5 days for one human to try to save an entire world with nothing but determination and a promise he refused to break. 4 days before the Voraks' arrival, Lee's quarters had turned into a workshop. Parts from his ship were spread across tables. Navian engineers and technicians came and went, carrying tools and materials. Lee hadn't slept much. Dark circles showed under his eyes, but he worked with steady hands. He was connecting a small device to what looked like a satellite dish. Ji-hyun entered with food and drinks. "You need to eat," she said, placing a tray nearby. Lee nodded thanks but kept working. Ji-hyun picked up a strange metal object. "What is all this?" she asked. "Components for a defensive network," Lee explained. "We're creating transmitters that can be attached to Navian satellites." "What will they do?" Lee took a drink from the cup she brought. "Several things. First, they'll create a detection grid that will give us early warning of exactly where the Vorak ships are. Second, they'll generate interference that might disrupt Vorak's targeting systems. And third," Ji-hyun asked, noticing his slight smile. "That's a surprise," Lee said, "but it might be our best hope." Ji-hyun sat down beside him. "The Council is preparing evacuation ships for our leaders and scientists. They have a place for you too." Lee didn't look up from his work. "I'm not leaving." "Lee, please," Ji-hyun said softly. "No one would blame you. You've done more than anyone expected already." He finally put down his tools and looked at her. "When I was younger, my grandfather told me stories about our family history. During a great war on Earth, my great-grandfather promised to protect a village from enemy soldiers. When the enemy came with many more men than expected, his friends told him to retreat. It was the logical choice." "What did he do?" Ji-hyun asked. "He stayed. He fought. He kept his promise," Lee said simply. "That's what humans do." "Did he survive?" Lee smiled slightly. "Yes, because he was clever as well as brave. He didn't just fight. He thought of a better way to win. He stood up and stretched. That's what I'm trying to do now. Not just fight the Voraks, outsmart them." 3 days before the Voraks' arrival, a message came from their fleet. Council member Tae rushed to find Lee at the communication center. "The Voraks' commander has sent terms," Ta said, handing Lee a tablet. Lee read the message, his face growing darker with each line. The terms were simple: complete surrender, transfer of all Navian resources, and population relocation to labor camps. "This isn't negotiation," Lee said. "It's a demand for slavery." "What do we do?" Tai asked. Lee handed back the tablet. "Keep them talking. Ask questions, request clarifications, anything to buy us more time." "Time for what?" Tai asked. "Our few defense ships can't stop them." "Time for me to finish our defense network," Lee replied. "And time for something else I've been working on." That night, Lee sent a coded message from his ship's communication array. The message went out in all directions, far beyond the Navian system. When he finished, Ji-hyun was watching him from the doorway. "What did you just do?" she asked. "Called for help," Lee answered. "From Earth." Hope briefly lit her face. "Not exactly." Lee looked tired but determined. "From friends." Ji-hyun shook her head in confusion. "I don't understand." Lee gestured for her to sit. Earth's government might be tied up in politics, but Earth isn't just its government. There are human colonies, trading ships, and independent vessels all through this sector of space. And they'll help us. Ji-hyun sounded doubtful. "Humans stick together out here," Lee said, "and many owe me favors." "Even so, civilian ships can't fight Vorok's warships," Ji-hyun pointed out. Lee smiled. "You'd be surprised what humans can do when pushed. Besides, we're not asking them to fight a traditional battle." 2 days before Vorok's arrival, Lee and a team of Navian engineers launched 12 modified satellites into orbit. Each carried components from Lee's ship. From the control center, Lee monitored their deployment. "Position them evenly around the planet," he instructed. "The network needs complete coverage." Counselor Kwon watched with skeptical eyes. "What exactly will these satellites do against Vorok's weapons?" "They're part of a larger system," Lee explained. "Alone, they won't do much. Together, with the right timing." He left the thought unfinished. Kwon snorted. "You're counting on a miracle." "No," Lee replied calmly. "I'm counting on human ingenuity and Navian courage." Later, as they left the control center, Kwon stopped Lee in the hallway. "Commander, I've been harder on you than the others," the counselor admitted. "I didn't trust humans. I still don't trust most of them. But I was wrong about you personally." Lee nodded. "Thank you, counselor." "That said," Kwon continued, "I studied military history. What you're attempting is impossible. One diplomat with a few satellites against a war fleet. History is full of impossible victories," Lee said. "And far more impossible defeats," Kwon countered. "If your plan fails, what then?" Lee looked the counselor in the eyes. "Then I die keeping my promise. But the Vorok's will know they faced a human, and that means something in this galaxy." 1 day before Vorok's arrival, Lee worked frantically to finish the final part of his plan. He'd converted his ship's shuttle into a control center for the satellite network. The inside was now filled with screens and equipment. Ji-hyun found him there, running a system check. "The Vorok's will be here tomorrow," she said quietly. "I know. Our evacuation ships can take 500 people at most," Ji-hyun continued. "The council wants you on one of them." Lee shook his head. "I need to be here to coordinate the defense." "Lee," Ji-hyun's voice broke slightly. "I've received reports about what happened on other worlds the Vorok's conquered. The things they did. Please don't stay here to die." Lee turned to face her fully. "Ji-hyun, do you remember when we first met? You said humans value honor and keeping promises." "I was wrong," she said bitterly. "Your government abandoned us." "Governments make political decisions," Lee replied. "But individual humans, we keep our word. It defines us. It's who we are." Ji-hyun's skin patterns pulsed with emotion. "Is a promise worth dying for?" "Some are," Lee said simply. "This one is." "I'm begging you," Ji-hyun said, tears flowing now. "Don't do this. Take the evacuation ship. Live." Lee stepped forward and gently wiped a tear from her face. Trust me, Ji-hyun. I'm not planning to die here. I'm planning to win. How? She demanded. Tell me how one human can defeat 15 Vorok's warships. Lee smiled mysteriously. Because I'm not just one human anymore. A beeping noise from the console interrupted them. Lee checked his screen, then broke into a wide grin. What is it? Ji-hyun asked. The first response to my message, Lee said. They're coming. Who? Friends, Lee replied. Human friends. The day of Vorok's arrival came with a tense dawn. The city was quiet, many Navians having fled to underground shelters. The council gathered in their chamber, waiting for news. Lee and Ji-hyun were in the shuttle-turned command center, monitoring screens that showed the approach of the Vorok's fleet. They'll be in orbit within 2 hours, Ji-hyun said, her voice tight with fear. Lee nodded, checking readings from the satellite network. The system is ready. When they enter our defense grid, we'll activate it. And then we see if humans really are as clever as we think we are, Lee said with a small smile. A new alert sounded. Ji-hyun checked it and gasped. More ships just entered the system, coming in fast from 3 different directions. Lee's smile grew wider. Right on time. Who are they? Ji-hyun asked, confused. Lee's eyes sparkled with determination. I told you, Ji-hyun, humans always keep their word. Not just one human. All of us. The Vorok's fleet entered Navia's orbit with terrifying precision. 15 massive warships, dark and spiked, lined up in attack formation. On the main view screen in Lee's command center, they looked like predators ready to pounce. They're hailing us, Ji-hyun said, her voice shaking slightly. Lee nodded. Put them through. The screen changed to show a Vorok's commander. The alien had gray, leathery skin, sharp teeth, and yellow eyes with vertical pupils. He wore black armor covered with small symbols that Lee guessed were kill marks. Navians, the Vorok's commander growled in a rough translation. Your time for surrender is over. Prepare for. He stopped suddenly, noticing Lee. A human? What is a human doing here? I'm Commander Lee Jun of Earth, Lee said calmly. I represent Navia in this matter. The Vorok's commander laughed, a harsh sound like rocks grinding. Earth has no authority here. Our scouts reported a single human ship, no threat to us. I suggest you check your scanners again, Lee replied with a slight smile. Things have changed. The Vorok's commander looked off-screen, receiving information from his crew. His yellow eyes widened slightly. Interesting. Small ships approaching from multiple vectors. Human vessels. The commander's mouth formed what might have been a smile. Merchants and miners by the look of them. Not warships. Do you think this will save you, human? Last chance to retreat, Lee warned. Leave this system and never return. The Vorok's commander laughed again. We do not retreat. Especially not from prey. He leaned closer to the screen. We will destroy your pathetic friends first, so you can watch. Then we will take this world. The screen went dark as the Vorok's cut the transmission. Ji-hyun turned to Lee, fear written across her face. They're going to attack. Yes, Lee said, suddenly very busy at the controls. And that's exactly what we wanted. The first Vorok's warship moved forward, weapons powering up. It targeted the nearest approaching human vessel, a mining ship with minimal defenses. Now, Lee said, pressing a sequence of commands. Around Navia, the 12 satellites activated simultaneously. They pulsed with energy that was invisible to the eye, but not to sensors. The pulse reached the Vorok's ships in seconds. On the screen, Lee and Ji-hyun watched as the Vorok's warship suddenly slowed, its weapons powered down. What happened? Ji-hyun asked. Phase 1, Lee explained. The satellites are broadcasting a signal that disrupts their main power systems. It won't last long, maybe 20 minutes before they adapt. 20 minutes isn't much time, Ji-hyun said. It's enough, Lee replied. Now for Phase 2. He activated another set of controls. The satellites shifted frequency, now broadcasting something else entirely. What are they sending now? Ji-hyun asked. Everything, Lee said. Every detail of the Vorok's attack, their fleet position, their weapon status. Broadcasting to every ship and outpost within 50 light years. Ji-hyun's eyes widened. You're telling everyone what's happening here. Exactly, Lee nodded. The Vorok's rely on secrecy. They pick isolated targets. They don't want witnesses. A new alert sounded. The incoming human ships had moved into position around the Vorok's fleet. Phase 3, Lee said with satisfaction. The human ships were a strange collection. Mining vessels with powerful cutting lasers meant for asteroids. Cargo ships with reinforced hulls. Small, fast courier ships. None were military vessels, but each had been modified with makeshift weapons or special equipment. They moved in a coordinated pattern that confused the Vorok's. When the Vorok ships began to recover from the power disruption, the human vessels were already executing Lee's plan. The mining ships fired their industrial lasers at key points on the Vorok's vessels, not attempting to destroy them, but targeting sensors and weapon ports with surgical precision. Cargo ships released clouds of metallic particles, normally used to mark asteroid claims, that stuck to Vorok's hulls and blocked their secondary sensors. Fast courier vessels darted between the larger ships, drawing fire and causing Vorok's weapons to target each other by accident. It's working, Ji-hyun said with amazement as one Vorok's ship's weapons hit another in the confusion. Phase 4, Lee said, activating the final part of his plan. The satellites shifted again, now focusing a tight beam on each Vorok's ship's communication array. The beam carried a computer virus, one of Lee's own design, based on Earth's most advanced military systems. On screen, they watched as Vorok's ships began to lose control. Some drifted out of formation. Others fired weapons randomly. Two collided, causing serious damage to both. How did you do this? Ji-hyun asked, watching in awe. Humans are good at improvising, Lee explained. None of these ships could fight the Vorok's in a fair battle, so we made sure it wasn't fair. The Vorok's are regrouping, Ji-hyun warned, pointing to several ships that had moved into a defensive circle. Lee nodded. They're adaptable, but so are we. He opened a channel to all the human ships. Pattern Omega, everyone, just like we planned. The human vessels immediately shifted tactics. Instead of harassing the Vorok's from all sides, they concentrated their efforts on 3 specific ships that Lee had identified as command vessels. The Vorok's, used to being the hunters, found themselves hunted by prey that refused to behave as expected. Their coordination failed as the human ships cut off their communication with each other. In the Navian Council chamber, the leaders watched the battle on their own screens. What had seemed impossible hours ago was now happening before their eyes. They're actually winning, Counselor Ta said in disbelief. Quan shook his head in wonder. One human diplomat called, and all these humans came. No official orders, no treaty obligation, just a request for help. It is not their ships that make humans dangerous, Dury said thoughtfully. It is their bonds to each other. Back in the command center, Lee monitored the battle with intense focus. 4 Vorok ships had been disabled completely. 3 more had suffered serious damage. But 8 were still fighting, and the human ships had taken losses too. We're running out of time, Lee muttered. The satellite's power cells are nearly drained. Just then, a new alert sounded. Ji-hyun checked it and gasped. More ships entering the system. A lot of them. Lee looked up sharply. Vorok's reinforcements. No, Ji-hyun said, her voice filled with wonder. Coalition ships, Earth military vessels. Sure enough, on the long-range scanners, a fleet of Earth's interstellar coalition warships appeared, weapons ready. They moved toward the battle with purpose. A transmission came through. Admiral Park's face appeared on screen. Commander Lee, the Admiral said, looks like you started the party without us. Lee couldn't keep the surprise from his face. Admiral, I thought all coalition ships were deployed at the Meridian border. The Admiral had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. Yes, well, official policy changed when videos of civilian human ships defending Navia against Vorok's aggressors started broadcasting across coalition space. Public opinion can be persuasive. You got my broadcasts, Lee realized. Every colony and outpost in the sector got them, the Admiral confirmed. The coalition couldn't ignore a direct Vorok's attack once it became public knowledge, especially with human civilian ships already involved. Lee smiled. Happy to have you join us, Admiral. We'll take it from here, Commander. You and your unconventional fleet have done enough. The remaining Vorok ships, faced with fresh coalition warships, made the only logical choice. They retreated, jumping to light speed with whatever damaged vessels could still move. In the command center, Lee and Ji-hyun watched them go. They ran away, Ji-hyun said in disbelief. The Voroks actually ran away. They're predators, Lee explained. Predators don't fight when they're outmatched. They look for easier prey. And Navia is no longer easy prey, Ji-hyun said with growing pride. Lee nodded, not with Earth as an ally. You kept your promise, Ji-hyun said softly. When I'd begged you not to try, when everyone said it was impossible, you still did it. Humans always keep their word, Lee replied with a tired smile. It's who we are. 1 month later, Navia officially joined Earth's interstellar coalition. The signing ceremony was held in the same council chamber where Lee had first met the Navian leaders. After the ceremony, Lee found Ji-hyun standing near a window, looking at the stars. I heard the news, she said as he approached. You've been promoted. Lee smiled. Coalition ambassador to Navia. I'll be staying here a while longer. Good, Ji-hyun said. The children at the school keep asking when you'll visit again. And what about you? Lee asked. I heard you received an offer too. Ji-hyun's skin patterns glowed with excitement. The first Navian to train as a coalition diplomat. I leave for Earth next month. You'll be excellent, Lee assured her. Ji-hyun looked thoughtful. Do you know what impressed me most? Not just that you kept your promise, but that other humans, strangers, came to help because one human asked. That's the real strength of humanity, Lee said. Not our technology or our ships. It's that when one of us makes a promise, all of us stand behind those words. The Voroks didn't understand that, Ji-hyun observed. No, Lee agreed. They thought they were hunting prey. They didn't realize they were challenging family. Together, they looked out at the stars, stars that seemed less threatening now, knowing that somewhere out there, human ships patrolled, ready to keep the promises made by one human diplomat who refused to break his word.